Good evening, thank you. I will step forward into the light. This is what happens when you have a Broadway lighting designer in your choir. Thank you all for coming. I was going to start by just playing the first piece, but I realized there was no one to introduce me here because our rector is away in Israel, and so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Jeffrey Hoffman. I'm delighted you all came this evening. I think most of you know me, and thank you so much for being here. This concert is on the Annunciation, the Feast of the Annunciation, which is when we think about the angel Gabriel coming and announcing to Mary that she's going to have a baby, Jesus. So most of the music this evening is in some way, shape, or form related to Mary. It's structured as sort of scenes in the life of Mary. And I'm going to begin with a piece by Marcel Dupré, the great organist of the Saint-Sulpice in Paris. And you'll pardon my French pronunciations. I am not fluent in French. It is. So that's Marcel Dupré. We're going to turn now to one of his star pupils, Jean Demisieux. Again, my pronunciations may not be accurate, so please don't hold that against me. I am not fluent in French. I am in German, but not in French. And so Jean Demisieux was one of his star pupils. She had a short life and a short career. Unfortunately, she died from cancer in the middle of her life. But she wrote some great pieces, and on the same sort of commission from the same publisher, an American publisher in Chicago, she wrote the following, the three chorale preludes I'm going to play tonight. I'm not going to play them all together. I'm going to play them separately, and they're going to set up the scenes of the life of Mary. So the first one of these is based on a Gregorian melody, as was the last piece. That little toccata was based on a Gregorian melody. This is also based on a Gregorian melody, and by Gregorian melody, I mean plain song or plain chant. This piece is called Rorate Celi, or Drop Down Ye Heavens from Above. The text is from Isaiah. It's a prayer for Advent, asking the Lord to come and deliver and let justice reign on the earth. And so it's also associated with feasts for Mary. And so this second piece now is by Jean Demisieux. It's from a set of chorale preludes that she wrote, somewhat in the style of Bach and on a commission from a Chicago publisher. And this one will be setting up the anticipation of Mary for the coming of Jesus. Well, the next piece is about the great event that we celebrate on this day, the Annunciation by the angel Gabriel. This piece by Franz Liszt, many of you may know that Franz Liszt was a virtuoso pianist, sort of the rock star of the 19th century. He traveled Europe. It is reported that people fainted dead away at the sound of his astonishing virtuosity. But what is lesser known about Liszt is that towards the end of his life, he turned to the church and he became an abbot, a monk and an abbot in a monastery. And he started playing the organ and writing pieces for the organ and for church. So this next piece is called Ave Maria von Arkadelt. It's actually based on a choral piece by the 16th century Franco-Flemish composer named Jacques Arkadelt. And it's a famous little motet based on the Ave Maria text. Of course, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. And that's the angel Gabriel's words to Mary and in this a special time that we celebrate tonight. It's a soft piece. We don't have bells on the organ, but he says to the organist in the directions to playing this piece that the beginning is supposed to sound like distant bells. So I imagine you can listen for the distant bells. Perhaps you're standing across the valley from a church and you can hear the distant church bells ringing, and then the choir starts to sing, and it's a bit soft because you're a bit far away. The choir starts to sing this beautiful and famous motet by Arkadelt called Ave Maria. And that's what you can listen for. We don't have bells on the organ, so I'm using the flute stops to sort of imitate that. But I think you can hear, if you listen carefully, you can hear the pealing of the bells. So, in the biblical account of Mary's journey, we know that after she found out she was going to be the mother of Jesus, she, of course, said that was a good thing, and she said, "Let it be with me as the Lord, as you have said." And then she goes to visit her sister, or her cousin rather, Elizabeth, who is also pregnant with John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, a little bit further along in her pregnancy than Mary was at that time, we think. But the biblical account says that she sang then the Magnificat, which is a very famous, of course, Vesper canticle, which we also sing at Evensong in the Episcopal Church. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit has rejoiced in God my Savior. The next piece is the fugue on the Magnificat, or the Fuga sopra il Magnificat, by Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach wrote this when he was a young man, sort of in the middle of his career, young, ambitious, serving the Duke of Weimar in Germany. This is before he ends up being the cantor in Leipzig, which is where he became very famous and developed his mature style. So there's a lot of exuberance in this piece. It's loosely a fugue. I wouldn't call it a very strict fugue. Some of Bach's later works that he calls fugues are much more strict. But it is fugal in style, and a fugue means, of course, that it's like a sophisticated canon or a puzzle where one voice enters and then another voice enters on the same melody, a fifth lower or a fifth higher, and then the next voice enters at the octave and another voice, if it's 3 or 4 voices. This is more or less a 4-voice fugue. But Bach saves the pedal part, the low part, for the 2/3 of the way through the piece. The melody that it's based upon is an old plainsong melody, and it had been very much used in the Lutheran worship at this point. It's kind of a boring melody. Da, 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 da. My soul doth magnify the Lord. So Bach does a lot of decorating. You could see his youthful exuberance with this piece, and he really goes to town with the orchestration, if you will, or the decorations and the embellishments of the fugue and the counter subjects. So this is the Fugue on the Magnificat by Johann Sebastian Bach. Thank you. So next, I think we're going to hear from Jean Damasio again. Perhaps you didn't know, of course, the next big event in Mary's life is the birth of Jesus that we know about. There's the whole thing about traveling to Bethlehem and all of that, but there's not a whole lot of music about that that's Marian in nature. So perhaps you didn't know, "O Come All Ye Faithful," a favorite Christmas carol many of us sing, is actually an old Gregorian melody. And Jean Damasio sets a very imaginative chorale prelude on that particular melody, which we'll hear next. This next piece is a little bit of a late addition to my program. The piece by Reinhold Glier, who was a Soviet composer, but he was most famous for being, and at the time that he wrote this piece, was the professor of music and director of the conservatory in Kiev. This is a fugue on a Russian Christmas song. I tried very hard with several of my Russian friends to track down the tune and to find out what it's about. Couldn't find that out, but I did have a lovely anecdote from a friend of mine who is a pianist who's from Novosibirsk, lives in California now, but is from Novosibirsk in Russia. But her grandmother grew up in Kiev, and she had a lovely story about her grandmother meeting Glier on the street one day when she was on her way to the piano lesson, and she had one of his books tucked under her arm. So he stopped to inquire why she had his book under her arm. One of his pieces, a collection of pieces, obviously. As far as I know, this is the only piece Glier ever wrote for the organ, and we have the abbot Joseph Joubert, who was also an organist and obviously an abbot in the French Roman Catholic Church, who in the 1920s and 30s commissioned a massive body of work from every composer he knew, could think of, all over Europe and the United States. And it's a massive collection, and so this is why we have this beautiful piece. I offer it as a prayer for peace in Ukraine and in Russia, and in tribute to the folks of Kiev who are standing guard over their city tonight. The next piece on this program is by a composer who's enjoying a certain renaissance of popularity of her works today, and that is Florence Beatrice Price. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know anything about Florence Price until about 2 years ago, when I deliberately undertook a search of African American composers and discovered this wonderful composer who was somewhat celebrated in her lifetime, which wasn't that long ago, and who won some major awards, including a commission who wrote her first symphony, which won a prize and was premiered by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at the World's Fair. But she's sort of fallen into disfavor for many years. She was herself an organist. This piece isn't necessarily Marian in context. The next piece is called In Quiet Mood. But I think of that passage in the scriptures that says that after the wise men came and visited. The shepherds came and visited. I think it's before the wise men came now. I have to go back and look at that again in Matthew. But the shepherds came and visited, and it says Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. So this is a piece by Florence Price in quiet mood. Ponder them in your heart. Thank you. Now we turn to Germany in the early 20th century, and a favorite composer of mine, Paul Hindemith. Hindemith wrote this piece in 1937, just a year before he and his wife escaped to Switzerland because of the Nazi persecution. His wife was half Jewish, and he also had been under some persecution from the Nazis because he was considered somewhat of a hedonist composer for some of the operas he had written early in his career. And this is about 3 years before he emigrates to the United States and becomes the composition professor at Yale University, where he spent most of the rest of his life. So this is his Sonata Number 2 for the organ. It's a kind of a favorite piece of mine. Enjoy. We hear again now from Jean Demazieux. This next piece is a chorale prelude on the hymn Stabat Mater, which is traditionally sung on Fridays. The hymn is in English is "At the cross her station keeping stood the mournful mother weeping close by Jesus to the end." It's a hymn about Mary standing at the cross watching her son being crucified. So we're turning away now from the happiness a little bit to the sad part of Mary's life. And this is the Stabat Mater, again by Jean Demazieux. The last set of pieces on this program are by, again, Marcel Dupré. This is a set of 4 short improvisations. These were actually they began life as a series of organ improvisations, and he wrote 3 books in Opus. I believe this is 18. It says in your program, and it's correct in the program, so it's Opus 18. And these 3 books of pieces were organ improvisations. They began life as organ improvisations that he did in 1918, if I'm not mistaken, or 1919. And it was on August 15th, the feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And he was deputizing or substituting for the great Louis Vierne at Notre Dame Cathedral, the Cathedral of Our Lady. And it was on the feast day of Our Lady, and he did a series of improvisations. These are little versettes, they're called in French. They're little improvisations based on the Plainsong melody. This one is based on the Ave Maris Stella. Ave Maris Stella is hymn to the Star of the Sea, and the name the Star of the Sea for Mary has been long associated with her, but it actually comes, I think, from a mistaken translation by St. Jerome. If I did my research correctly, he misunderstood Miriam, which is the name of Mary in Hebrew, as Maris, and Maris in Latin, of course, is sea. But the name stuck, the hymn stuck. This hymn is a wonderful Gregorian melody to Our Lady, the Star of the Sea. And you can see the little versettes as he's thinking about each verse of that wonderful melody in each of these pieces. So the first piece is a quasi-canon with a little bit of a toccata figuration. There's a canon between the right hand and the pedal throughout the piece. The next piece is a little bit of an ornamented chorale, if you will. The next piece is a chorale in the style of Bach. And the last movement, of course, is a toccata. Dupré is famous for writing toccatas. And y'all pray for us. That one's hard. All right. This is Ave Maris Stella, the second book of Opus 18 by Thank you all so much for coming. There's a reception waiting for you down in the parish hall, thanks to our lovely Cherry Green Hall. I have one more piece if you'd like to hear it. From this set of pieces, this is from Book 1, and this piece is called I Am Black But Comely, Ye Daughters of Jerusalem.